Man, what's up, guys? So excited to be joining you. Last week, Tyler kicked us off in the series that we're in, Almost Christian, where we're looking at several people that, they were so close to the things of God, but yet they missed the heart of God. And we're going to continue in Luke chapter 18. If you have a Bible, I invite you to grab it. We're going to be in Luke 18 tonight, looking at this parable, the short passage of Scripture. And to set up the point for this evening, whenever, this was like a few years ago, there was on my roof at my house, there was a piece that needed to be replaced. Well, I was like, I don't know if you know me, but getting on a roof made me a little nervous. And so I was like, I'm going to wait till either Glenn, my stepdad, would come into town, or Carrie's dad, Terry, my father-in-law, would come into town. And so Terry comes into town first, and I was like, Terry, do I got a job for us? And I was like, that piece they said is broken. And I don't know if you, again, I have anxiety issues. Hi, my name is Travis. And I was like, I cannot get on top of this roof by myself. And so he gets there. We go to Home Depot. We get the part, and we set up the ladder, and we're going up. And this guy, he is just a G with it. He just picks it up and he walks up, and it's like he doesn't even grab the ladder in front of him. He just walks on and just steps onto the roof. And I'm following him up, and he's going, and his name's Terry. I'm like, whoa, you're going too fast. Back up, Terry. Okay, some of y'all got that. And so he turns around, and I'm like, give me a second, okay? And so I start to climb this ladder to try to get on this roof. And so as I get up, and there's the gap between the ladder and the roof where I had to get on, I saw the grade on how steep it was. And I got up, and my legs started shaking, right? And I'm like giving myself a pep talk. I'm like, just give me a minute, man. And it's this point, like in my mind, I'm going, okay, like you can't, dude, quit being a pansy, Travis. You're freaking out in front of the dad. Stop it. And I'm like, well, you got to climb up and get on this roof so that way you can show him that you're a man too. And so I go and I pull I'm like, okay, I'm going for it. And I pull myself up, and I literally start seeing stars, okay? And I'm like, Terry, I'm not going to be able to help you with this. I go down off the ladder, and I'm watching Terry change the thing out, and my wife is next to me, along with like our girls, and I'm like just like side-eyeing her, like, man, he's doing a good job. And I was thinking in that moment, he was probably like, yep, I think she might have made a mistake on the guy that she chose to marry. But it was this moment, and we all have these moments. It was this swallow your pride moment where man, I realized I can't, I don't have it in me. I thought I was probably gonna faint and fall off and die, is kind of in my mind. And man, I had to watch him do what I could not do. Now, the reason why I say that is because the same way that I had to swallow my pride, Jesus is going to give this parable that we're about to read, which a parable is simply a story with a spiritual truth inside of it. And he's going to invite us to swallow our pride, to come to him humbly and trust him to do what only he can do and we simply cannot do. Now, there's going to be two characters in this story. One of them is going to be the Pharisee, the other the tax collector. In this Pharisee, he refuses to come to God in his pride. He refuses. He trusts in his own works, is what it says, in his own goodness. And it says that he looks at others with contempt. And he refuses to just humbly pull back the curtain and come in honesty before the Lord. And that's the invitation for all of us, that we would come to God in humility and not miss the heart of God completely like this guy does in his judgment of this tax collector as he trusts his own goodness. Look at Luke chapter 18, and we'll dive in. Starting in verse 9, it says, he also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. 2 men went up into the temple to pray. One, a Pharisee. This is the pastors of the day, religious leaders of the day. And the other, a tax collector. These are the notorious sinners of the day. They made a living by stealing from their own people, essentially. And verse 11, it says, the Pharisee standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector, as he motions over towards him. And he says, I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector standing far off would not even lift up his eyes to heaven. But he beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And then Jesus says, I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. So a lot to dive into as we unpack this for our moments together. But the first point this evening is that the prideful, what do? They build a wall, but the humble build a pathway. The prideful, they build a wall for others that they cannot cross. It's an obstacle for others to be in a prideful person's way. But the humble are going to build a pathway. Where do we see this in the passage? Well, it says in the very beginning that it introduces these characters and said that one is a Pharisee, and the Pharisee was standing by himself. Now, the word Pharisee literally means separate ones. So this is actually a play on the name Pharisee itself. So he was separate, and there's a picture here that he was separate, saying, I have nothing and want nothing to do with this guy over here, as he motions to this tax collector. And the point that we're trying to get, the point that Jesus is trying to get across to us is simply this. Man, pride, what does it do? It poisons. Pride, it poisons how we see ourselves. He sees himself in the wrong light in this passage. And it poisons how we see others. He sees this other man in the wrong light in this passage. He thinks he's better than this guy. And he looks at him with contempt. As Christians, the simple truth is this, is that we're not better. We're simply redeemed. Last Saturday, so I go to the same Starbucks a couple times a week to study by my house. And so I'm in line, and one of the baristas who's there often, and I've gotten to, at least a cordial relationship with her, gotten to talk with her quite a bit. She had just gotten off of her shift, and she was in line right in front of me. And so we just had small talk, and I was like, oh, what do you got going on today? And we were talking about the weekend, and then she just in passing, I don't even remember exactly how it got to her saying this, but in passing, she said, well, something about me is that I'm actually in recovery. And immediately I was like, man, that's a pretty big thing just to throw out to somebody that you hardly know. And I just go, man, that is amazing. And I said, how long have you been in recovery? And she said, I've been in recovery for 2 years. And I said, that's amazing. Keep going. And I said, there's a pastor that I listened to, and I told her about this pastor. I said, the pastor's name's John Elmore, and John Elmore, he actually has been living, his big thing is one day at a time, that you just go one day at a time to live in recovery, to live, for us as Christians, to live in the redemption of Jesus. And I said that he had the sermon that I'd watched, and in this sermon that I watched, he actually had, he's been in sobriety, from alcoholism for well over a decade. It's been a long time. And he had this bucket of pennies on the stage, massive bucket that had a penny in it for every single day that he had lived in sobriety, one day at a time. And he took that bucket of pennies and he poured it out on the stage, talking about all the days that he had walked in freedom because of Jesus, one day at a time. And so she was amped up, and she was like, heck yeah, except she didn't say heck. And I was like, yeah, this is cool, right? And that's where the conversation ended. I was like, have a good day. And I actually saw her today, said hi, and talked to her a little bit. But I walked outside, and I just happened to be reading this passage. As we're looking at this Pharisee who sees somebody, he shows contempt for how he's viewing somebody that's obviously in what we would call, quote, a bad lifestyle. And God just hit me about what it means to be Christian. With this thought, to be a Christian, what does it even mean? To be a Christian in a lot of ways is simply this, to live in recovery. That's in so many ways, that's the Christian life. What do I mean by that? Well, man, I was lost in Jesus. He found me, right? He recovered me, if you will. It says that we were spiritually blind, And Jesus, he gave me sight, a recovery of sight that the spiritual blinders fell off. And now, man, I can see and I can walk in the light of Jesus that I once was blind to. To follow Jesus, it means to live a life of recovery. And as I started to think about that, and I started to think about this passage, I started to think about like, man, the church should be a lot more like an AA meeting and a lot less like this Pharisee in this passage. An AA meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous, if you're unfamiliar. Like if you think about going into an AA meeting, if you've never been, you can imagine with me going into and joining that circle of people. Think about the judgment-free zone that would be. Why? Because the moment that you step into that circle, everyone just by being there is saying, I've got issues too. And really the church, just by being here, you are saying, I need Jesus now. And I've got issues that God is working in my life too. Whether you've been living in spiritual, quote, sobriety, you've been following Jesus for a long time, or maybe you're in day one. When you join that circle in an AA meeting, it's this place where no one's gonna just throw contempt your way. Why? Because they were once in your shoes. And that's a picture of what I feel like the church should be like. Man, and at the way, whenever we are in semester, we hear stories weekly, right? We hear stories and testimonies of people who God has broke through to them. And there's so many cool things that God is doing here. But man, we all have sins that we come in here and we need to experience the forgiveness of Jesus for those shortcomings and those sins and those addictions that we have in our life. And then a lot of us, we come in here like Tyler was talking about, man, and we have wounds that we need the healer to encounter us in the middle of that hurt and that pain. All of us, by being here right now, are admitting, God, I need you, and at least by being here. And man, like that's the oh my God, I need you, just saying that over and over and over again. I would pray that would actually be the anthem of my life and yours. But this Pharisee, he's missing it. This is Jesus' problem with the Pharisees and these religious leaders that throughout the Gospels, you see him go at these guys because he was missing this, so he was judgmental. Now, this isn't on the PowerPoint, but something that we could all write down is that judgmental Christian is an oxymoron. What do I mean by that? Because I want to be clear here. Judgmental, what do I mean? That doesn't mean that we don't call each other up to live a life of holiness. It doesn't mean that we don't have an accountability and encourage each other to get sin out of our lives. Actually, guys, that's one of the reasons why they have meetings in AA, right? They're trying to encourage one another to stay out of certain things and to stay into things that are better for them. We're supposed to do that with Jesus in our lives. So it's not that we don't make any judgment calls at all. What does it mean to be judgmental? And what's the difference of just making a judgment? Well, it tells us to be judgmental is to treat others with contempt. What does that word mean? It means that I look down on you. You're not as good as a person as I am, nor can you be. Judgmental, to see somebody in a way that you're looking down on them. So for us, questions to consider when we think, man, am I like that? Am I judgmental? Ask yourself this, like, how do I view people who are stuck in a sin struggle? How do I view people that, man, that over and over again, it just seems like they're struggling and they can't get certain decisions away from their life? How do I view someone that's stuck in the, quote, bad lifestyle? Then like this tax collector, this would have been his means of living, and he would have been a very rich man. Most likely. And so this was his lifestyle. Like, how do I view someone that's stuck in a bad lifestyle whenever they come into a worship gathering like this? How do I view frat boy Frank? After he's been out all night going pretty hard in the paint. How you knew that is a whole nother conversation for another time. But how do I view whenever that guy shows up now at the way in our college services? If you're here, glad you're here. If your name's Frank, that's actually kind of funny. But how do we view somebody that's coming out and just the night before they were stuck in that kind of a thing, or they were making those types of decisions? How do we view those people? How do you? Do I judge them? Am I in the sense that I'm judgmental towards them, or do I reach out to them? Do I build a wall, or do I seek to build a pathway? What does it mean? Like if you're in here, if you're a Christian, you're going, okay, what exactly does it mean to build a pathway? Well, I think it starts with our view of that individual. Like whenever I'm meeting with somebody, guys, and I get to meet with people that are stuck in all kinds of things. A lot of people they're like, hey, Christianity's kind of weird. It's not my thing. Then other people, a lot of people that are in the midst, they're saying, I follow Jesus, but I've been struggling with this or that, and I'm really battling here and there, and we talk through that. And then there's people that are really on fire for God, and I get to have lots of conversations that are all across the spectrum as I have conversations with people. And man, whenever I talk to somebody that's in the midst of a struggle, truly, like in my heart, I'm just like, this is a person just like me. Whenever I see the guy that's stuck in a lifestyle of sexual sin and getting drunk and getting high, I'm going, man, like that was literally my story. When I see somebody that's hurting, and they're hurt and their pain, instead of running to God, they ran away from God and actually feel like it's God's fault. And so they ran from God for years, and that's kind of where they're at. Man, I see someone that's just like me, that's somebody that needs to realize that there is a God who loves them. Whenever I see somebody and they're stuck in their sin struggle, I see somebody that, just like I was, maybe they don't realize it yet, but they're stuck in this prison spiritually. And they need the freedom that Jesus has to offer them, just like I did. There's so many ways that whenever we view them, we should see them as people that need Jesus, just like we once did and like we do now. It all starts with, what is your view of that individual? And then what do? It says that this Pharisee, he separates from this guy. We don't separate. We seek to reach out. We seek to be invitational. We say, man, hey, welcome to the circle. I think that you'll fit in here, and you can ask your questions here, and you can struggle freely here, and you don't have to put on the mask here. And it's okay that you're not okay here, and it's okay that you came in as is condition, and I want you to meet the Jesus that changed my life. I want you to experience the same one that put all the brokenness inside of me back together and is still working in my life now. Should be our attitude. But this Pharisee, he just doesn't get this. And he views him with contempt. And maybe you're here and you're going, and we could probably do a raise of hands at this moment of some of us who have been in the church and we've actually been the person who has been judged. And so what happens is we feel like, man, we got the stiff arm from the people that represent Jesus. I'm going to share a part of my story here in just a moment about that. But if that's you, if you're going, man, like I was hurt, I was honest, and they gave me the stiff arm, and I felt like they separated themselves from me and wanted nothing to do with me, and it was really confusing, and I'm actually surprised. There's people that have come into our gatherings here at The Way, and I've had this conversation fairly often where they'll say, I'm actually surprised that I decided to show up because of all the religious baggage in my past. If that's you, if you've built the wall up because of the fact that you've been hurt before by the church, you've been burned by the church, I want to invite you, would you take that wall down? Would you just consider taking that wall down? Would you consider that man, maybe Jesus actually has something for you? And when Jesus sees you, what I want you to hear, even right in this moment, is that he sees someone worth saving. He sees someone that he has a plan for. But this Pharisee, he sees him with contempt. Why? Why? Because I think that most of us right now, I don't think that there's, at least my guess is that there's probably no one in the room right now that you're like, I don't know, I'm kind of team Pharisee. I don't think anybody's like, I think that's kind of like, I read this passage, I heard you read that before you made your points, and I was like, that Pharisee's who I want to be. No, I don't think that's where we're at. So how do we get there, and how did this guy get there? Well, we get clued in as we continue reading. Look at verse 11 and 12. As he starts to pray, it says he's standing by himself and he prays this: God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust adulterers, or even like this tax collector. And then he says, I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. You see it? I, 5 times. His focus is him. His focus is his own morality, and he judges himself and everyone else on and strictly on outward morality is what Jesus is depicting in this passage. And man, I think it's so easy for us to do that if we're not careful. To pray to God based on our morality instead of his mercy. This is what he does. And this is where, man, like, as I look at this passage, I'm like, this is the almost Christian idea is coming into play here. Because if you just look, like if my daughter was praying at night as we pray together, and she was like, God, I thank you that I'm not like extortioners. I've been like, you said extortioners, and that is incredible. We need to enter you into a spelling bee immediately. But if she said that, I'd be like, okay, that's not a bad thing to like go, I don't want to be an extortioner. I'm not like, I don't know. You feel like you're arrogant. Like that wouldn't be my immediate response to her. Like, God, I thank you that I'm not falling into all these other things that I could be falling into. God, I thank you that I'm not like that. Like, that's not part of my story. Like, in and of itself, do y'all see that? Like, I'm not like, man, this is a terrible prayer. It's actually not. If you look at it, you're like, wait, what's the problem with the prayer? Is it not good, to celebrate that you haven't fallen into like a very unhealthy lifestyle? So what's going on here? Like what is it that Jesus is so off-put by and cannot stand that so much that he's going to teach a lesson based on it? Well, here's the point. You can either be full of yourself or you can be full of your Savior. But you can't be full of both at the same time. You can either be full of yourself or full of your Savior, but you can't be full of both. And then God's goal, as this Pharisee clearly is judging himself and others based on morality, God's goal is not for us to be good. God's goal is for you and I to be godly. And there's a difference there. Like this Pharisee, he is outwardly, morally very, very, very good. So a key question that this passage is begging for us to ask is, what is the difference between goodness, in this guy's goodness, and actual godliness? Like, what's the difference between these two things? Well, the answer is actually in the word itself. When your goal is goodness, what you're going to see is that all you're going to do is be judgmental at the end, because the goal is, again, what's the end goal of that? To be good. It's in the word. When your goal is godliness, you actually have God as the ultimate goal. You want more of God. Is your ultimate goal, is my ultimate goal, to just be good or to have more of God? As you're thinking right now, as you're hearing this, like, is your goal to be good or is it to actually have more of God? And I think that they're so close but yet so far off, because to the word good and word God itself, it's only one letter off. Going with this almost Christian idea. But yet this guy, it says that he did not leave and go home justified at the end of this. God wants us to want more of him, but his spiritual measure is his outward morality. And so imagine that I had this ladder. And imagine I took this ladder and I was like, man, I've got to change that light. And I'm going to use this ladder to do it. Immediately y'all would go, do you see the problem? And I'm like, no, and this is what we do spiritually. We're like, we want to reach the light of Jesus. We're like, man, I can do this. I can be good enough in and of myself, is how this passage starts. And you're like, man, we're like, I'm going to go to church. Like, this is something that you got to do. Apparently, this is like That's like one of the first things people say. Do you go to church? Do you go to church? You go to church? You're like, man, like, is being in church like what makes you holy? And so you're like, yeah, I got to go to church. Again, these are good things, but this guy would do these things, and he was like, so I'm going to do this because I think that's what good people do because I want to be good. And then he's like, man, I'm not going to do the really bad sins that other people do. I'm not going to be an extortioner. I'm not going to be like this tax collector. I'm not going to be like the scarlet letter A sins that I see around me. I'm going to stay away from all of that stuff. And man, I can reach the light by being good enough. And then we get to this part where he's going, listen, I teach the Bible to others. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to teach others how to follow God. And there's actually 613 laws that the Pharisees were really uptight about other people following. 613, you heard that number right. And they would teach everyone else that, man, you need to follow the law in order to be good enough. Inevitably, everyone fails, right? But they're going like, no, I can do it. And then he says, man, I'm going to fast. The only thing that most of us in here have done is fast food, okay? And so this guy's going like, man, I'm even going to give up food for a period of time so I can be good enough for God. This is as high as I'm going because I told you, anxiety. You don't want to see me like, doop. And he's going to go, listen, like I tithe. I even tithe. I give money to the causes of God. And what happens? And I'm going to reach the light. Inevitably, just like you knew from the very beginning, I'm not going to reach the light. I missed the light. Hey, here's the point, guys. If the goal is to be good, God will always be out of reach. Romans chapter 3, verse 10 says it this way. No one is good. No, not one person. Not even one. None of us are good enough without God. And not only that, so we miss the light ourselves. And now what am I doing? Now I'm in a position where I can just look down on other people. And this is how the Pharisees lived their life. They missed the light themselves and they just looked down on others. And man, I don't want you and I to be like that. I don't want you and I to miss Jesus, first of all, and I don't want you and I to have someone else come into our presence and they feel like they can't be open about anything that they're dealing with because it seems like, man, we just think we're better than everyone. Whenever I came to know Christ, I said turn back to Jesus. And God, man, was changing my life in so many ways. There was a group of people in the church that instead of celebrating what God was doing in my life, they were threatening to push me away from God because they just reminded and they like rehearsed my past. I remember, and they didn't know that the pastor was mentoring me. They didn't know that man, like I was meeting with everyone I could to just soak in what God would have for my life. Like they didn't know that real change was taking place because I met a real Jesus that meets me in a real broken state and really put me back together. They didn't know any of that, and I felt like nor did they care. And I remember actually hearing a statement from somebody at one point. And this guy, he said, and I overheard him. He said, "Oh, I know what that guy's done, and I know who he's been with." And this is after months of me following Jesus. And the people of the church, God's Christians, almost pushed me away from Christ. Isn't that wild? And I don't want that to be us. And I'm so thankful that here, man, like we're seeing people come in, and again, like God is changing their life, and people are getting saved and baptized, coming out of all kinds of stuff, and it's an amazing, amazing thing. But man, I don't ever want to get here. How do we keep from getting to that place? This place of being judgmental? Well, I think it's really simple. You and I, we remember what God saved us from. This is how you keep from becoming like this Pharisee. You remember what God saved you and pulled you out of. It's really hard to judge someone in an AA circle. And it should be really hard to judge someone in a church. But sometimes it happens. And this guy, this Pharisee, you know, like he just simply, it's really a simple message. He doesn't realize his own need. That's what Jesus says. This guy doesn't realize, he trusts in his own self. He doesn't realize his own need, and so he's stuck in his own pride, and he's judging this other person. And how does he get here? Because here's what he does. He simply does this. What a lot of people can do if we're not careful, he plays the highlight reel. That's what he does. All of us, he just says what he wants God to see. And he doesn't say any of the other stuff that Jesus goes at the Pharisees for. Did y'all catch that as you look at that? He just plays a few things from the highlight reel. Here's some things I don't do. Here's the things that I do. And I'm just gonna hide all of the rest. It's so easy for us to do this. And I'll just give you a real world example. Anybody can present just some of the highlights and hide everything else. So my aunt has been in the online dating scene, okay? And so I met the guy that she's currently dating, and we'll call him Raymond, because that's his name. And so everybody loves that guy. Everybody loves Raymond, everybody? Okay. And so I'm talking with Raymond. He's meeting the family for the first time. And he was like, yeah, man. And they started talking about the online dating and everything. And like, I'm not hating on online dating. This is just his words. He said, man, sometimes it can be tough. I'm not going to lie. You get some interesting stories. I'm like, do tell. I'm here all night. And so he starts to share. And I was like, give me your top one. And he's like, okay. I went and met with this girl at, he said, called her a gal. I met this gal, he's an older individual. And so, and he said, I met this gal at Papados, and we were having that first, get to know you date, and we had contacted on the dating site and decided we're gonna actually have a date. Well, they were talking, and he said it was going decent, and they were getting to, and he was kind of running, whenever you first have that first date, and you're like, I'm running out of questions. Are you running out of questions? I don't know what else to talk about. He said he was at that place, and he was like, okay, well, maybe we should get dessert. And they were talking about dessert. In the midst of talking about dessert, he said, well, let me ask you this. So let's real talk here. Are there any deal breakers for you? And I kid you not, he said in that moment, she popped her teeth out of her mouth. All of them. Placed them on the table and said, is this a deal breaker? That's really the story. He goes, hey, that's not the bad part. He said, she kept her dentures on the table in Papados for another 10 minutes she never popped them back in. So, needless to say, they did not get dessert. I was like, man, that story really bites, doesn't it? And I was like, I bet she probably didn't mind skipping dessert because she definitely didn't have a sweet tooth, right? And so, anyway, okay, I'm out. Here's the thing. What he said was, listen, and no shade if you have dentures, we all come to Jesus as is, and God loves you. He said that actually wasn't the problem. It was like that she kept them on the table. That's the problem. And man, he was like, yeah, so she didn't put that factoid in the bio. The point is that all of us can present what we want other people to see and just kind of hide the rest. And the Pharisees, this is what Jesus calls out throughout the Gospels. You see him, he calls them out for greed, selfish motives, like this guy, his contempt and his pride, and all these other issues that Jesus has his strongest words reserved for these guys. And this guy's unwilling to come to God with any of that. He just wants to go with the highlight reel and hide everything else. And this is what we can do. It's really easy. I'm not hating on all these things. I have multiple of them right now. Like we can wear the He Would Love First bracelet, right? We can wear the cross necklace. You can have the verse in the bio. But yet, whenever you come here, you're just kind of like playing a part. And then your Monday through Saturday, it looks very, very different than what you present to God and others here. And God's going to say, would you just come out and be authentic and real? You can come to the spiritual AA circle, but just be honest. And this is what we do, and this is what one of our interns here, Leah, this is what she said, that's what I did. I got really good at presenting. I was the good Christian girl when I needed to be. But all the other things that I was doing had nothing to do with Jesus. And this is what Jesus is trying to call out in all of us, because if we're gonna be really honest before God, we all have things that we would rather pretend aren't actually there, you know? Sometimes it's easy to just not bring it up, at least for a while. So what are those things for you? It takes humility to come out of hiding before God. Will you come out and pull back that curtain, come out of hiding? Because this Pharisee, he stays in hiding. He would rather just highlight and hide everything else. Highlight his outwardly good stuff, but highlight a heart that does not belong to God at all. Man, God doesn't want your highlight reel. God wants your humility. This is the call of the passage. This is what the tax collector embodies, humility before God. And as his head is face down, because he said he wouldn't even lift his head, his heart is definitely pointed up as he's crying out to God, just going, God, I realize right now in this moment, my way is no longer working and I need you. I'm tired of living this life. I'm tired of going after all these things that I thought that would satisfy and that the world told me would satisfy. And I'm just done, Jesus. I want to go your way. I don't want to live this way anymore. Will you have mercy on me? And that's what God is after. Why is it so important to God that we would come to him humbly? The next point is this: recognizing your own need for mercy. It makes you moldable before God. We see this in verse 13 and 14. It says, the tax collector standing far off would not even lift his eyes to heaven, but he beat his breast saying, God, be merciful to me. And then it says, this man went down to his house justified before God because he came in humility. And God, when he sees the humble heart, that's a moldable heart, a heart that's going, God, your way, not mine. I need you. And it says at the end of this passage that the exalted will be humbled and the humble will be exalted. And man, which one do you want to be? I know which I want to be. I want to be the humble that God lifts up. Now, I want to be clear to what does it mean to walk in humility? It's not self-deprecation. It's just this recognizing that, man, like I need God. God sustains me. I love how Andrew Murray says this in his book, Humility. Probably my favorite quote on humility. It says, here is the path to the higher life. Down, lower down. Just as water always seeks and fills the lowest place, so the moment God finds men abased and empty, his glory and power flow in to exalt and to bless. It's being in this constant state of, God, I need you. Is this how you're living? Man, I've been at the place where I've realized, man, I have nothing to give. Constant struggle really is, I joke about anxiety, but it really is a constant struggle for me. Even this weekend, it was not an easy weekend for me. I've been at this place where panic attacks were so heavy, like I felt like my heart was gonna burst open, like physically. Even trying to go in to get like a to-go order that my wife sent me into the restaurant to get. Which man, that's hard to even say. Like that's a tough place to be. And I've been at this place where I go, God, I just have nothing else to give. I have nothing, Jesus. And this is where God has spoken to me multiple times and just said, bring your nothing. Bring your nothing. Will you bring your nothing? Will you just put one foot in front of the other and trust me? And whenever God found me in my sin, I was like, God, I have nothing but a baggage of sin. Man, just bags and bags and loads and a wake of sin of my life. And God just said, that's all I'm asking you to come with is all that you are. Bring it all. So will you bring your nothing? Will you bring your pride? Will you bring your sin? And maybe you're thinking, man, I feel like that's all I have. I feel like I stand before God, and maybe you resonate with this tax collector and you're going, God, I messed up and I need you, and will you be merciful to me? And the good news of the gospel is it says that God is rich in mercy and that he loves you and he died for you, and he is now reaching out to you with the nail-pierced hands that he took for you on the cross saying, would you grab my hand? Would you cry out? And would you cry out for me? And God will reach down right where you're at, right here, right now. But will you bring your sin? Will you bring your morality checklist and go, God, I realize I'm never going to be good enough. I don't want to be good in front of everybody else and somehow still miss the light of Jesus in my life. I just don't want to do it. Will you bring your nothing? The point of this message is actually pretty simple. Pride, it makes you look down. In humility, it makes you look up. So as we close, I just want to pray together. And would you bow your head and close your eyes? And would you get your heart in a posture of looking up? For us that have been saved a while, following Jesus, we can be in this almost Christian place whenever we quit recognizing our need for God. The truth is, I need God as much today as I did in my worst moment, and so do you. Would you in your heart look up towards God? And would you just say, God, I need you? Would you say, Jesus, mold me? Maybe you've never really cried out to God in salvation, and would you just cry out to Jesus saying, Jesus, I put my trust in you. Would you save my life? He died on the cross and rose 3 days later to build a bridge, build a pathway to you. Would you say yes to him?